Whether it be movies, books, or video games, combat and conflict are essential to most narratives. It creates tension in the art and keeps the viewer involved. But when it comes to the most interactive form of media, it can become addicting. Video games are the media in question, and combat is where the most interactive form of media gets to shine the brightest. It's where the players get to experiment with multiple strategies to overcome many obstacles. It's where it gets your blood a-pumping and your mind a-moving. About a year ago now, I started playing a game called Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and fell in love with the combat. It was addicting. It was like the game found an itch in my brain and scratched the hell out of it. And every so often, I get that itch to play Sekiro again. I revisit bosses and fight them again and again until I reach perfection. But why? What is it about Sekiro that can find that itch and scratch it? Why is it only Sekiro that can scratch that annoying itch? Well, I think I found out. In most games, when you engage in combat, you have three choices to make. You can either attack your enemy, defend from attacks, or flee the scene entirely. But Sekiro takes the defense portion and kind of crumples it up and throws it at you, says no, bad. In Sekiro, the most effective form of defense is also a form of attack. It is not standing your guard and blocking attacks. It is timing the enemy's attacks and using it against them. It is a move that takes offensive strategies and defensive strategies and mixes it into one mechanic. It's also known as the most addictive move in video games, the parry. The parry, counter, deflect, whatever you want to call it, has existed outside of Sekiro and functions the same in most games. To successfully perform a parry, the player must predict the enemy's movements and attacks, then summon the parry animation right before the enemy strikes. Successfully doing this will leave the enemy stunned or damage the enemy directly after. Performing a parry can give the player a sense of gratification for reading their enemy like an open book. Not only that, but a parry can also motivate the player to finish the fight because of the sudden shift in momentum. Look at this parry in Breath of the Wild. Link had successfully parried the Lionel's charge and left the Lionel wide open for a counterattack, making Link really happy and less scared of the big man. But there comes a giant risk to parrying. If the player misses their small window to parry, then they will either take some of the damage or left wide open to an attack. Just like this Link, who is now sad. Sekiro takes the parry and puts it into its DNA. It's such a core part of the game that everything can be parried. Everything. Doesn't matter if it's a guy with a sword, a demon's foot, or a monkey. Everything can be parried. But how does it work? How does it work in Sekiro? Well, I'ma tell you. In Sekiro, there are two ways you can kill an enemy. You can either deplete their health bar by attacking them, or you can predict the enemy's attacks and parry them to fill up their posture gauge. Both lead to a mighty death blow, which is essentially the game's dramatic finish to an enemy. Parrying them, however, is the most efficient way to achieve the death blow, because filling up a posture gauge takes less time than it does to deplete the health bar. Parrying an enemy also produces this nice feedback of a sound of like crunchy metal and a spark, a visual spark that looks freaking cool. I like it a lot. This, combined with the visual of the posture gauge filling up, helps the player feel more rewarded in doing their behavior. This loop of reinforcement for behavior is actually a psychological behavioral learning experience called Operant Conditioning, and it is one of the reasons as to what makes the parry so addictive. Operant Conditioning is a form of behavioral learning discovered by behavioralist B.F. Skinner. It is essentially taking a behavior and giving reinforcement for that behavior. It was like a little bird in a box with a lever, and the bird would pull the lever and get food for pulling the lever. Eventually, a subject will do a behavior and get reinforcement so much that every time they do that behavior, they expect that same reinforcement. And every time they get it, they feel good. It feels good to do the task and get the reinforcement. Just like putting money in a vending machine and picking a product. You expect to get that product, and when you do, you feel good. You got a little snack, and you got what you expected. Sekiro uses operant conditioning in the form of the parry, whereas it tries to train your behavior in order to parry the enemy, to see the feedback and to see the posture gauge fill up in order to get you closer to your goal. The parry in Sekiro is used as both positive and negative reinforcement, whereas every time you land a parry, you get closer to your goal of winning the battle. But every time you miss the parry, you get closer to losing the battle. It's a high risk and high reward situation that lets the player want to become better with the parry. When starting out or facing a new enemy, the player may do this little jig. This is the result of me mashing the parry button. It's a product of the player's uncertainty, and since they don't know the enemy yet, they try to gamble on getting a parry by mashing. Although the player may land a parry, it's not exactly optimal because the game knows you're mashing. So if you end up landing a parry, or if your deflect is a little bit off, you'll take a little bit of damage and posture damage, but you'll still deal posture damage to the enemy. This is negative reinforcement while also not trying to be too harsh. The game knows you're experimenting and you're against a new guy, so go ahead and try again. Something I genuinely appreciate about Sekiro is how the game balances difficulty. No challenge feels impossible because you have all of the tools that you need at your disposal. You have your parry, your dodge, and your attack. That's all you really need in order to beat every boss in the game. Every challenge to overcome, every fight you encounter, you only need those three things. And the game knows this. It's structured around this. The game definitely throws in some flavor with the shinobi prosthetic tools, the items you can use, and the ninjutsu, but that's all just flavor to experiment strategies with, to come up with new ways to overcome the boss. You don't actually need them to win. Unlike its sister games, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, and the Souls series, there is no stat you need to level up or can level up by killing your average Joe enemies. There is no weapon you need to level up in order to deal damage to the boss. There is no being underleveled in Sekiro, and there is no being overleveled in Sekiro. There's only one thing you need to worry about in Sekiro, and it's your mindset.
It's a game that presents a seemingly insurmountable brick wall and tells you that you can, in fact, surmount it. Not by out-leveling it, but by getting to know the brick wall so intimately, understanding it so perfectly, that eventually the wall will feel like an old friend. At the end, your knuckles may be bloodied and your shoulder may be bruised, but you'll realize that the wall has opened a door to you specifically, and you can simply walk through. The brick wall of difficulty won't be limiting, it will be liberating.
And I've barely even scratched the surface with Sekiro's combat. The game's mechanics have so much depth that I could talk your ear off for hours. Hell, I haven't even mentioned the dynamic relationship between the health bar and the posture gauge. But I have an assignment to turn in, and this video is taking forever. So, I hope you learned something about the parry, the psychology behind it, and subscribe. Please.